Hello everyone, it's Aaron K1994 and I have returned. In this video I'm going to be discussing none other than episode 619 of the Atheist Experience, hosted by Matt Dillahunty and Jen Peoples. In this episode they discuss the would they die for a lie argument, and their objections are just absolutely horrible. So let's get started here.
Today's show, I have a question for you, and that is, would you die for a lie? So the claim is that Jesus must have been divine because his disciples wouldn't have died for something that they knew was a lie. So they must have known that he was the Son of God and that he was resurrected.
Now, the way that pretty much any Christian apologist on YouTube would use that argument, this is nothing more than a straw man fallacy. Nobody would claim that just because the disciples died for the belief that they saw the risen Jesus, that therefore proves that Jesus rose from the dead. No Christian apologist on YouTube says that, okay? They say that because they died for it, then that proves beyond any reasonable doubt that they believed it, which then you have to explain the origin of the belief in the resurrection. So this is nothing more than a straw man fallacy.
And of course, our immediate response to that is to point out that the 9/11 hijackers...
Oh, brother, yet another straw man fallacy, and the usual stupid analogy used against this argument 10,000 times. The reasons why this analogy isn't valid is because Muslim martyrs weren't eyewitnesses to Muhammad. They were simply Muslims because their leaders taught them Islam. The disciples were eyewitnesses to the risen Christ. This is why this analogy fails. The apostles had to have seen what they thought to be the risen Jesus, or else there's no way that they would have died for it.
The other problem with this die for a lie claim is that it makes several assumptions that can't even withstand casual scrutiny. The first of which is that Jesus existed as an actual historical person, in spite of the fact that there's no extra-biblical evidence of this.
Wow, that is a load of crap. First of all, why do we need extra biblical evidence? Most scholars and historians, including the skeptical scholar Bart Ehrman, would take just the Gospels themselves as evidence enough that Jesus existed. Second, there are tons of extra biblical evidence that Jesus existed. Josephus, Tacitus, Lucian, we've got Celsus. We have tons of extra biblical evidence. So let's see their very brilliant rebuttals to all these pieces of evidence.
And before you guys email me with Josephus and Suetonius and Tacitus, yeah, I know about that stuff, okay? It documents the existence of Christians. It does not document the existence of Jesus. Okay,
that's just an outright lie. If you read Annals 1544, which is the Tacitus mention, it clearly says that Christus suffered under Pontius Pilate. It does not say Christians believed that Christus suffered under Pontius Pilate. Okay. And Josephus specifically mentions Jesus and how the Christians followed him. Matt Dillahunty tries to address Josephus right after this, so let's look at that.
Jesus. Josephus, there's the passage that references Jesus. There's the Testimonium Flavius, which is generally considered to be a forgery.
One, it's not just the Testimonium Flavianum. We also have the James, brother of Jesus, reference later on in the Antiquities of the Jews, which there's no evidence whatsoever that it's a forgery. Second, no, it is not widely regarded that it's a forgery. In fact, a study done by Louis Feldman, a leading Josephine scholar, he's not a Christian, so you can't say he's biased or anything like that. Out of about 50 scholars studying the passage, about 40 of them came to the conclusion that it was actually partially authentic with some minor interpolations. And so your objection to the Josephus passage is really bad.
But it doesn't matter,
right,
because Josephus wasn't born until after Jesus would have supposedly died anyway, so it's not contemporary evidence. It's
right,
still hearsay, second or third person removed at least.
There are two things that I have to say in response to this. One, contemporary evidence, it's not a requirement, okay? When will you people get this? It's some of the best forms of evidence you can have, but it is not a requirement for history. Matt, if you want to say it is, cite a historian that says that contemporary evidence is the only type of reliable evidence. Second, later on in this episode, he actually contradicts himself on this issue. So we'll get back to this clip later on in the video.
It assumes also that the disciples existed, and that they actually died for their beliefs and not for some other reason.
I have a lot of stuff to say in response to this. This is even more ridiculous than the last clip. Okay, first of all, over 6 sources outside the New Testament attest to not only the existence of the apostles, but that they also died for the conviction that they saw the risen Jesus. Secondly, the Gospel of Luke attests to this also. So that is evidence. Do not say, oh, circular reasoning is in the Bible, unreliable, blah, blah, blah. Third, we actually have very convincing evidence that 2 of the 4 Gospels are actually written by the apostles themselves. That is Matthew and John. I have videos on every Gospel defending their traditional authorship. And this clip was just really, really, absolutely ridiculous.
And it also assumes that, assuming the disciples existed and Jesus existed and everything, that's all historically true, absent the miracle claims, or even including the miracle claims, assuming all that's true, that they were simply not deceived. They could have just been deceived.
Care to elaborate a little, Jen? That's a pretty simplistic explanation of the origin of belief in the resurrection. 2 more things to say in response to this. First of all, the disciples he later says that it could have been an illusionist. So this is a response to that point. First of all, the disciples were in close contact with Jesus for 2 to 3 years. They would know if it was the real Jesus or just somebody posing as him. Second of all, what motive would a guy have just running around posing as the risen Jesus? What motive would they have? That's my question. So as I'm watching this, naturally, I'm appalled at all these ridiculous things that they're saying. So I later call into the show. Unfortunately, the people in front of me blabbered on for hours, so I only had 4 or 5 minutes to say what I was going to say. So let's review that call and see what Matt Dillahunty has to say in response. Okay, when addressing the ex-biblical evidence for Jesus, I'm not going to go into Josephus because that just takes way too long, but let's just do Tacitus really quick. Okay, you say that Tacitus, he only referenced Christians, and this it's false. If you go to the Annals 1544, which is a section, it says, Christus, the founder of the name, suffered at the extreme penalty at Pontius Pilate. It does not say...
Yes. I agree with you. Did you think I hadn't read the Annals? Have you read that in the context? He is writing a letter asking what I do about these Christians, and when he talks about and mentions Christos, he's not relaying any evidence or testimony to that. He's talking about what these people believe to have happened.
1. Tacitus' Annals, they are not letters. They're history books. Secondly, no, if you read the passage in context, he's clearly recording that Christus, suffered at Pontius Pilate. Third of all, whatever. Let's take what Matt Dillahunty is saying, and that this passage is just the description of what Christians believe. Well, using that logic, it doesn't make any sense, because later on, it's a clearly anti-Christian passage. He calls Christianity a mischievous superstition, hideous evil. So basically, he interviewed these Christians like, oh yeah, our religion's, it's mischievous, it's hideous, it's evil. This is absolutely ridiculous. Okay, you say he wasn't contemporary. Well, what I would say is contemporary evidence is not a requirement for history. You don't have to have a contemporary source. If you'd like to claim that, then could you please cite me a historian that specifically says that you need contemporary evidence?
Why would I need to cite a historian?
Well, because they know what they're talking about. They're the people who know, the criteria for history.
No.
Something as common as a crucifixion or something like that, you don't really need contemporary evidence. It's just what I'm saying.
And I'm pretty much fine with that.
Now, don't you find it interesting that in the earlier portions of the episode, he was clearly saying that contemporary evidence is the only kind of reliable evidence. He was just brushing off all the pieces of evidence just because they weren't contemporary. And even when I called and presented Tacitus, he's like, anyways, it's not contemporary, so you can't use it, it's unreliable. But then, when I actually call him on it and ask him to provide somebody who actually knows what they're talking about, he suddenly switches his criteria and says, well, I'm okay with them not being contemporary. This is just double standards, and he just switched his criteria real quick to dodge my question. Dishonest. So this concludes my discussion on episode 619 of the Atheist Experience, and showing how they're just amateurs in history, and they have no idea what they're talking about at all. And when they're called on the ridiculous statements that they said earlier in the episode, they switch their criteria real fast just to dodge your question. So, thank you very much for watching, and have a nice day.